of 1985, police in Quebec arrested a man on a minor weapons charge, but the suspect asked to speak to a senior officer, and what he offered closed 90 unsolved murders in a single conversation, because most of them he had committed himself. He turned out to be the most prolific killer in Canadian history, and a man like that should never have seen daylight again. Instead, he played the irony so well that he walked into a deal that paid him for his cooperation. $40,000, steak dinners, and a color TV in a guarded private cell. How does a man murder dozens of people and walk away with a salary and a fresh start? This is the Hells Angel who became Canada's deadliest hitman, long before Mom Boucher. His name was Yves Trudeau. To understand Trudeau, you have to understand the world that produced him. Decades, Quebec had been one of the most conservative places in North America, locked down under strict Catholic rule, in a period its own people called the Great Darkness. When that system collapsed in 1960, an entire generation of young men with no money and no prospects went looking for rebellion, and thousands of them found it in outlaw motorcycle clubs. By 1968, more than 350 biker gangs were operating in Quebec alone, all fighting over the same streets and drug corners. The violence got so bad that the province earned a nickname in the criminal underworld. They called it the Red Zone. One crime journalist recalled an outlaw's hitman telling him he was scared of going to Montreal. Yves Trudeau grew up in the middle of it. Born and raised in Montreal, the son of a strict ex-military father and a homemaker mother, he stood just 5'6" with a slight build, the kind of man who stayed on the outskirts of every group he was part of. But as a teenager, he took a job at the CIL plant on the south shore of Montreal, a factory that manufactured industrial explosives. It was there that he learned how bombs were built, and he would later say it was where he discovered how much he enjoyed making things explode. At 22, Trudeau joined the Popeyes Moto Club, the second largest biker gang in Canada, and one buried up to its neck in racketeering, drug dealing, and contract killings carried out for the Montreal Mafia. His first murder came almost immediately, and it was not even planned. The club sent him after a man who had stolen a leader's motorcycle. The job was supposed to be a beating. Trudeau killed him instead. But in the days that followed, the men who had never noticed the quiet little rider now respected him, and some of them feared him. Trudeau realized that killing got him the acceptance he had been chasing his entire life, and he was willing to do it again. The opportunity arrived fast, because the Popeyes were heading into the first major biker war in Canadian history. The American giants had come north. The Hells Angels wanted Montreal and chose the Popeyes as their entry point. Their oldest rivals, the Outlaws, backed Satan's Choice, the largest club in Canada, and pushed them into Popeye's territory. The 2-year proxy war that followed left more than 20 men dead, and it was where Trudeau stopped being just another Popeye and became the club's chief assassin, putting his factory training to use on living targets. By the end of 1977, the chessboard was set. Satan's Choice patched over to the Outlaws. 5 months later, on December 5th, the Popeyes became the first official Hells Angels chapter in Canada, with Trudeau as a founding member, the first generation to wear the death head in the country. Two clubs that hated each other now shared one city, and fistfights were breaking out wherever their members crossed paths. All it needed was a spark. On the night of February 17, 1978, 2 members of the Outlaws provided one. Dressed in full club colors, they walked into a bar on the east end of Montreal that everyone in the city's underworld knew was protected by the Hells Angels. The 2 outlaws sat at the bar and ordered drinks. Wearing Outlaws colors inside a Hells Angels bar was a message in itself, and the Angels treated it as one. A group of them grabbed the 2 men and threw them out onto the street. The Outlaws did not leave. They stood outside shouting threats at the Angels inside, and while they stood there, a car rolled up the street and slowed down beside them. Behind the wheel was Yves Trudeau. He opened fire, killing Outlaws member Robert Côté and wounding the other before driving off into the night. The killing of Robert Côté on February 17, 1978 is recognized as the official the start of the first biker war, and within weeks both clubs were hunting each other across Montreal. It quickly became clear the Angels held one advantage the Outlaws could not match. They had Trudeau. 1 month into the war, on March 21, 1978, Trudeau planted a bomb underneath the car of Gilles Carteret, the president of the Outlaws' Montreal chapter. The device exploded in front of a bar on Bordeaux Street, killing Carteret instantly and wounding several bystanders with debris. A few months later, another senior outlaw answered a knock at his front door and was shot in the head where he stood. That became Trudeau's signature, walking up to a target's home and killing him the moment the door opened. Through 1978, the Outlaws lost one key member after another. Their response barely registered. Across those same months, the only Hells Angels casualty was a single member with a grazed arm from a botched drive-by. Morale inside the Outlaws collapsed, and a senior member named Roxy Du Temple decided the club needed a knockout blow to stay in the fight. His opportunity came on October 12, 1978. The national president of the Hells Angels in Canada, Yves Buteau, was meeting with Walter Stadnick, leader of an Ontario gang called the Wild Ones, trying to recruit them and open a second front in the Outlaws' home province. Mid-meeting, 2 outlaws attacked with a pistol and a sawed-off shotgun. 1 Hells Angel and 2 Wild Ones died. 2 more Angels were seriously wounded, and the 2 men the bullets were meant for walked away untouched. When Buteau learned Du Temple had ordered the ambush, he called in Trudeau and told him killing Du Temple was now his #1 priority. A month later, Trudeau was driving through the city when he spotted a man walking down the street who matched Du Temple's description. He pulled over, approached the man, and asked him in French, "Are you Roxy?" The man said nothing. Trudeau took the silence as confirmation, drew his gun, and shot him in the head. The next morning, Trudeau opened the newspaper and learned who he had actually killed. The dead man was William Weichhold, a German tourist with no connection to organized crime of any kind. He had not answered Trudeau's question for a simple reason. He did not speak French. He had been walking down the wrong street in the wrong city at the wrong time, and his resemblance to a biker he had never met cost him his life. When Trudeau read the article, he laughed hysterically. He felt no guilt over killing an innocent man. His only frustration was financial, because the Hells Angels refused to pay for a contract he had not completed. His position was that anyone who looked like Du Temple should be killed as well, just in case, and that he deserved payment for the work. The Angels disagreed and kept their money. 4 months later, Trudeau found the real Roxy Du Temple and killed him with a car bomb. The next contract came almost immediately. Word reached Buteau that a gang based in Laval called the Huns was preparing to join the Outlaws, handing his rivals fresh manpower mid-war. On April 3, 1979, just 5 days after the Du Temple bombing, Trudeau knocked on the front door of the Huns' leader, Robert Labelle, and shot him in the head when he answered. By the end of the decade, the pattern was undeniable. Of the 23 outlaws killed during the war in Quebec, police would later establish that 18 died at Trudeau's hands. One man had outkilled entire chapters. Buteau rewarded him in 1979 with something few hitmen ever receive: his own chapter, a new Hells Angels charter in Laval just north of Montreal. And Buteau gathered the most violent and unstable men in the organization under one roof and gave them autonomy. The Laval chapter wasted no time proving how dangerous that decision was. Buteau had been pushing the Hells Angels toward discipline because the club's future was in business, and business required men who could stay out of jail and keep their hands off the product. Laval was explicitly prohibited from using drugs. The rule was ignored from the start, and nobody ignored it more thoroughly than Trudeau. At his worst, he went through $60,000 worth of cocaine in 3 weeks, more than the price of a house in Montreal at the time, burned in under a month. An addiction that size needed feeding, and murder became his income. Depending on the target, Trudeau charged anywhere from $2,000 to $200,000 per contract, and his reputation had spread so far beyond the club that the Angels began doing something almost unheard of. They contracted their assassin out to other criminal organizations, renting him the way a company rents out equipment. His most important client was the West End Gang, the Irish-Canadian organization that ran the Port of Montreal. Whoever controlled the docks controlled what came into the city, and what came into the city was drugs in enormous quantities. The Hells Angels depended on that supply, which made the gang's leader, Frank Ryan, one of the most important men in the Quebec underworld. In January of 1982, Ryan came to the Angels with a problem that nearly destroyed the alliance. Two Hells Angels owed him a substantial cocaine debt, and rather than pay it, they had been planning to kidnap Ryan's children and use them as leverage to erase what they owed. Ryan's ultimatum was simple: deal with the two members immediately or lose the drug supply entirely. For Boucher, there was no decision to make, only a complication. If the membership learned the national president was executing his own men to satisfy an outside gang, it could fracture the club. The job had to be invisible, so the job went to Trudeau. The two targets were Denis Le Curé Kennedy, the leader of the kidnapping plot, and a Popeye veteran who had once stormed an outlaw's clubhouse alone during the war, and Charlie Hodges, a man drowning in drug debts. Both were Trudeau's clubmates, so Trudeau invited them out for a night of drinking. He sat with them for hours, and when they were drunk enough, he offered to drive. He took them to a secluded spot outside the city, shot both men in the head, and dumped their bodies in the St. Lawrence River in January of 1982. The alliance held, and almost nobody inside the Hells Angels ever knew it happened. But the precedent mattered more than anyone realized. The club had proven it would kill its own members when they became a liability, and Trudeau had proven he would do it without hesitation. It does not appear to have occurred to him that the same logic might one day apply to a cocaine addict burning through club money and attracting police attention. By 1982, that described Trudeau better than anyone else in the organization. Then, in September of 1983, Laval lost the one man whose protection mattered. Yves Boucher was standing outside a bar in Drummondville, smoking a cigarette, when a member of the Outlaws walked up and put 2.38 caliber bullets in his chest. The architect of the Hells Angels' entire Canadian expansion was dead in seconds. His funeral drew more than 150 Angels from Canada, the United States, and Europe. And the day after, a young boy walking near the procession route found a camouflaged bomb planted directly on the path the riders had taken. The device had malfunctioned. Police concluded the Outlaws had planted it, and that a faulty detonator was the only thing that had prevented the deadliest attack of the war. Boucher's death changed nothing in the war, which the Angels were still winning. What had changed was Trudeau's position inside the club. The men rising to replace Boucher looked at Laval and did not see the club's most effective killers. They saw a liability that needed to be dealt with. By mid-1984, the war was over. 6 years of assassinations had gutted the Outlaws' leadership, and after the Angels killed their new Montreal president, along with 2 top lieutenants, the Outlaws pulled out of Quebec entirely, leaving the Hells Angels in sole control of the province and its drug trade. Peace did nothing to slow Trudeau's work. The contract that would define his career arrived at the end of 1984, and it came from the West End Gang. On November 13, 1984, Frank Ryan was murdered in a Montreal hotel room, betrayed by men from his own organization. Leadership passed to Alan Ross, known in the underworld as the Weasel. And when word reached Ross that the killers had been overheard bragging about the murder, he knew exactly who to call. Trudeau tracked the killers to a downtown apartment building near Concordia University, a property that mostly housed students. The 4 men inside knew they were being hunted and had gone to ground. They rarely left, which made a conventional hit nearly impossible. Trudeau could not catch them on the street, and forcing his way in meant a gunfight with 4 armed men. So Trudeau did not go to them. He sent a gift instead. In the early morning hours of November 25, 1984, an associate of Trudeau's arrived at the apartment carrying a television, a VCR, and a video cassette, a copy of Hells Angels Forever, a documentary produced by the club's Manhattan chapter. 4 wanted men opening their door to a stranger at 4 in the morning should have ended the plan right there, but these were not careful men. By most accounts, they were heavy cocaine users, and whatever suspicion they felt was outweighed by a free television. They took the gift inside. Hidden inside the television was a bomb. When the men put the tape into the VCR, Trudeau detonated it. The explosion tore through the building, killing all 4 men instantly, shattering windows across multiple floors, and damaging the homes of 8 neighboring residents. In a building full of students, it was pure luck no one else died. The bombing made headlines across the country and within the underworld. Everyone knew whose work it was. It became the most famous kill of Trudeau's career. It was also the beginning of his downfall. When Trudeau went to collect his $200,000 fee, the West End gang told him to collect it from his own club, out of the cocaine debts various Hells Angels chapters owed them. Trudeau wanted his money, so he started knocking on doors, traveling between chapters in Quebec and as far as Halifax, pressing his own brothers to pay up. It was the worst possible move at the worst possible time. The other chapters were already furious with Laval over its debts, its arrests, and above all, its consumption, because everyone knew the cocaine meant for the street was disappearing into the noses of the men assigned to sell it. Now, the most notorious member of that chapter was showing up at clubhouse doors, demanding money for a contract the rest of the club had nothing to do with. Trudeau believed he had just pulled off his masterpiece. What he had actually done was put himself and his entire chapter at the top of an agenda, because in clubhouses across Quebec, senior Hells Angels were beginning to discuss the Laval problem, and the solution taking shape was not a fine or a demotion. The final straw had a number attached to it: $98,000. That was what the Halifax chapter, one of the poorest in the country, paid Trudeau toward his bombing fee. What Halifax did not know was that a quarter of that money rightfully belonged to Trudeau's own Laval chapter, and that Trudeau had quietly kept the difference and put it up his nose. When the Halifax president, David Wolfe Carroll, discovered he had been robbed to feed a brother's cocaine habit, whatever patience remained for the Laval chapter was gone. And patience was already a scarce resource, because the Hells Angels were in the middle of becoming something new. The club's leadership now saw the organization as a business, one that sold franchises, managed territory, and moved product at industrial scale, with partners like the West End Gang and the Montreal Mafia, who were professional operations and expected the same from everyone they worked with. In that world, there was no room for the old image of the biker, the hard-partying outlaw who consumed his own supply and collected arrests like patches. One journalist who covered the club for decades put it simply: before 1985, the Hells Angels were disorganized and unruly, more like a street gang. The cleanup came in 1985. Laval was everything the cleanup was aimed at. Its president, Laurent Villot, was an alcoholic and a cocaine addict, and under him the rules Buteau had imposed dissolved completely. The chapter consumed products meant for the street, embezzled profits, racked up arrests, and owed money in every direction. The pressure was no longer coming only from inside the club. The West End Gang and the Mafia were both leaning on the Angels to bring their problem chapter under control. The man who took the lead was Réjean Lessard, president of the Sherbrooke chapter and one of the most powerful figures in the Quebec Hells Angels. When David Wolfe Carroll traveled to Quebec to demand action against Laval, he expected an argument. Instead, Lessard agreed with him completely and spent much of the meeting calling Laval a menace and a threat to the existence of the Hells Angels in Quebec. Also present was Georges Beaulieu, known as Beau Boy, another senior figure in the Sherbrooke chapter. By the end of the meeting, the 3 men were aligned on what needed to happen. In March of 1985, at a secret meeting of the club's leadership, the Laval chapter was formally declared to be in bad standing. This means the chapter was to be liquidated. The planning was methodical, which was itself a sign of what the club had become. The fate of every Laval member was decided in advance. 2 would be forced into retirement. 2 would be offered transfers into the Montreal chapter. The rest would die. And on the list of men marked for death, two names mattered most to the planners. Lessard and Carroll specifically wanted Trudeau gone. In their eyes, he was the most dangerous man in the chapter and the most out of control. A contract killer with a cocaine addiction and no loyalty beyond his fee. The mechanism was an invitation. The Laval chapter was summoned to a party at the Sherbrooke chapter's clubhouse in Lennoxville, a fortified bunker on a wooded hill in the eastern townships. Members of multiple chapters would be in attendance, and for Laval, the invitation was mandatory. Trudeau never showed up. A week before the gathering, he had checked himself into a drug detox facility in Oka, Quebec. He wanted to clean himself up because he knew what happened to members who were always high. He had no idea how literally true that was about to become. The cocaine addiction that had put his name at the top of the kill list was the same thing that kept him out of the building on the night the list was executed. The most prolific killer in the club's history survived its most famous massacre not through instinct or skill, but because he happened to be in rehab. On March 24, 1985, the rest of the Laval chapter walked into the Lennoxville clubhouse. Waiting inside were 41 Hells Angels drawn from the Sherbrooke, Montreal, Trois-Rivières, and Halifax chapters. On Lessard's command, the trap closed. 5 members of the Laval chapter were forced into position and shot to death. The dead were Laurent Villot, Jean-Guy Geoffrion, Guy-Louis Adam, Michel Mayron, and Jean-Pierre Mathieu. According to testimony from men who were in the room, one of the killers stood over a victim as he lay dying on the floor and told him the reason. He said, "You sniffed too much. Too much went up your nose." These were not enemies or informants or rivals. The men pulling the triggers were killing their own brothers. One member present watched his own biological brother die and did nothing, because the club had ordered it. When it was over, the bodies were wrapped in sleeping bags, weighed down with cinder blocks and weights, and dumped in the St. Lawrence River. 2 weeks later, the purge claimed one more name. Claude Roy, a prospect with the Laval chapter, was beaten to death by Michel Geneste, a Laval member who had been spared on the condition that he transfer to Montreal and prove his loyalty. Roy was his proof. That June, police divers began pulling the bodies out of the river, and Quebec woke up to what the Hells Angels were capable of. The massacre disgusted even hardened figures in the underworld. One of them was Salvatore Cazzetta, a rising gang leader who had been preparing to join the Hells Angels. After Lennoxville, he refused. He considered the purge an unforgivable betrayal of the outlaw code, and instead of taking the patch, he founded his own organization and called it the Rock Machine. 9 years later, that decision would come back to haunt the Angels in ways no one could have imagined. Trudeau was still in the detox facility, unaware that everyone he rode with was dead. Then a representative from the Montreal chapter came to see him, and the message he delivered was simple. Trudeau was out of the club, and he was a marked man. But there was one way to buy his life back, and it required one more body. The target was Jean-Marc Deneger, the Laval chapter's accountant, and the only other member who had escaped the massacre. Like Trudeau, he had missed the party at Lennoxville, and like Trudeau, that made him unfinished business. The Montreal chapter's offer was straightforward. Kill Deneger, and the club would let Trudeau live. For a man who had murdered 2 of his own clubmates over a drink 3 years earlier, the decision required no soul searching. Trudeau tracked Deneger down within weeks, and in March of 1985, he strangled him to death. He left the body in the trunk of a car parked on an abandoned city street. It was his 43rd murder, and it would be his last. Trudeau had done what was asked, but he understood his situation better than the club assumed. He had spent years watching the Hells Angels make promises to dead men. The following month, in April of 1985, he was arrested on a weapons charge, an offense minor enough that a man with good lawyers might have beaten it entirely or walked away with a token sentence. Trudeau pleaded guilty and took a year in prison without a fight. He had his reasons. Word had reached him that despite the Deneger killing, The Hells Angels had placed a $50,000 contract on his head, and they were working on arrangements to have him killed inside. The man who had spent 15 years as the most feared hunter in Quebec was now the prey, and he knew better than anyone how rarely the prey survived. Behind bars, under guard, he was at least harder to reach. That prison was the safest place in Canada for him, which says everything about what his life had become. The bitterness ate at him. Sitting in jail, marked for death by the only family he had ever belonged to, Trudeau began weighing an option that no Hells Angel in history had ever taken. Inside the club, the rules around violence were flexible. Killing rivals was business. Killing brothers, if the club ordered it, was also business. But one crime stood above all others: the single unforgivable act for which there was no explanation and no appeal: talking to the police. The code held with a strength that law enforcement found almost impossible to break. Police had spent years arresting bikers and offering them money and sweetheart deals in exchange for testimony, and every single one had refused. The silence went beyond the members themselves. Detectives approached girlfriends, wives, and parents, and got nothing. After the bodies from Lennoxville surfaced, investigators worked every angle they had on a massacre with 41 witnesses, and not one person in that clubhouse said a word. Then, one night around midnight, a commander in the Montreal police force named John Dalzell received a phone call. The message was strange. An inmate at Parthenay jail was asking for him by name, a man Dalzell had crossed paths with some 15 years earlier and never since. The inmate was Yves Trudeau. Dalzell had his driver take him to the jail that night. When the two men sat down, Trudeau had one question. He wanted to know whether the Quebec provincial police could be trusted. Dalzell told him he believed they could, then asked the obvious question in return. What did Trudeau have to offer them? Trudeau's answer was 4 words: 43 murders. The police had arrested Trudeau as a nobody on a gun charge. They were about to discover they were holding the most prolific killer in Canadian history, and he was ready to talk. When investigators began debriefing Trudeau, the scale of what he carried became clear almost immediately. He confessed to 43 murders committed between 1970 and 1985. The methods covered nearly every way one human being can kill another: 29 shootings, 10 bombings, 3 fatal beatings, and 1 strangulation. On top of the murders, he admitted to 15 attempted killings. When detectives broke down the list of his victims, they found that 33 were figures from the criminal underworld. The other 10 were innocent civilians, people like William Weichold, who died for being in the wrong place or standing too close to a target. The information he provided allowed police to resolve 90 unsolved murders, which created a situation prosecutors had never faced before. Their new star witness was not just helping them solve old killings. In 43 of those files, he was the killer. The Crown needed his testimony to take down the Hells Angels for Lennoxville, and Trudeau knew exactly what that testimony was worth. What followed was a negotiation, and Trudeau won it. Under the deal, he pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter, not murder. The sentence was officially life in prison, but the word meant almost nothing, because the agreement made him eligible for parole in just 7 years. For each human being Yves Trudeau killed, he would serve roughly 2 months, and the state did not stop at leniency. In exchange for his cooperation, Trudeau received $40,000 paid out over 4 years, plus $35 a week for cigarettes. He was housed in comfortable quarters under police protection, with privileges that reportedly extended to steak, dinners, and a color television. Canada's most prolific killer was now living better in prison than many of his victims' families were living outside of it. The justice system had paid a staggering price for his testimony. Then the testimony turned out to be worthless. The problem was preparation. Police and prosecutors had never handled an informant like Trudeau, and they made a mistake that would poison everything. They never independently corroborated what he told them. No supporting investigation, no physical evidence assembled behind his claims, nothing. The entire case rested on the word of one man, And when that man took the stand, defense lawyers understood immediately what to do with him. They simply let him talk. In trial after trial, defense counsel walked Trudeau through his own catalog of killings, one by one, in front of the jury. He described shooting men in the head on their doorsteps. He described the bombs, the beatings, the bodies in the river. Jurors sat and listened to a confessed killer of 43 people, a man who had laughed at the death of an innocent tourist, and then they were asked to convict other men based purely on his word. They declined. Across 4 trials where Trudeau served as the key witness, every single accused walked free. The deal had failed in court, but the damage it caused still reshaped the underworld. Trudeau's information put 39 Hells Angels behind bars, and the national president, Michel Langlois, fled Canada for Morocco to escape arrest. The Lennoxville convictions came through other means, with 5 members receiving life sentences, and the combined fallout tore a hole in the top of the Quebec Hells Angels. The man who eventually climbed out of that hole was named Mom Boucher, and Quebec would pay for him in blood. The public, meanwhile, learned what their government had paid for worthless testimony, and the outrage was loud enough that the Justice Minister announced a public inquiry into the deal. The inquiry was never held. The headlines moved on, the file quietly closed, and in 1994, after 9 years, Yves Trudeau walked out of prison with a new identity and a public that had forgotten he existed. What he did with that second life would bring the outrage back, and this time, it would be worse. The man who left prison in 1994 was, on paper, no longer Yves Trudeau. The government issued him a new identity and relocated him to Valleyfield, a small city southwest of Montreal, far enough from his old territory that no one would recognize the face. There, Canada's Deadliest Hitman began a second life so ordinary, it borders on the surreal. He took a job as an orderly in a nursing home, spending his days caring for the elderly. He also drove a bus for the handicapped. The hands that had built bombs and strangled men now helped seniors out of their beds and steered disabled passengers to their appointments. He entered into a relationship with a woman who knew nothing about his past, not the patch, not the murders, not the name he had been born with. To her, and to everyone in Valleyfield, he was simply a quiet man with a quiet job. For 6 years, it held. Whatever was inside Yves Trudeau stayed buried under the routine of work and the discipline of supervision. But the story did not end there. In 2000, Trudeau was laid off from his job. The structure that had held his life together came apart, and the old appetite returned. Trudeau slid back into cocaine addiction, and in 2004, his name surfaced in the newspapers for the first time in a decade, attached to a crime that ensured whatever remained of his anonymity was gone forever. Trudeau was arrested and charged with the sexual assault of a 14-year-old boy. He could not find a lawyer willing to take his case. The man whose deal had once commanded police protection, a salary, and a private cell now stood in court representing himself because no member of the bar would stand next to him. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years. But the conviction carried a second consequence that mattered far more. Trudeau was still on parole from his life sentence, and the new conviction revoked it automatically. The life sentence he had once escaped in 9 years now reactivated in full. The judge who sentenced him used the moment to put Trudeau's existence into words that would follow him to his grave. He told him, "In your lifetime, you have killed more people than the entire Canadian military did in the Gulf War." Then he added a final assessment. He said there was definitely in Trudeau an instinct of evil. The outrage that had faded in the 90s came back in full force, and it found a new target. The provincial police were forced to admit that even now, after the new conviction, Trudeau remained under police protection funded by taxpayers. The public was paying to keep him safe. Inside the prison system, that protection became the entire shape of his existence. Trudeau now carried the 2 most dangerous labels a Canadian inmate can hold. He was a police informant who had testified against the Hells Angels, and he was a convicted sex offender who had assaulted a child. Either one alone was a death sentence in the general population. Together, they meant Trudeau spent 23 hours every day, locked in solitary confinement, alone in a cell, kept alive by the state he had once embarrassed. The doors had closed on him for the last time. All that remained was the ending. In 2006, while sitting in solitary confinement, Yves Trudeau was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer. The disease moved quickly. Within 2 years, the man who had terrorized Quebec for 15 years was a skeleton in a wheelchair, speaking in a weak, raspy voice. Facing the end, Trudeau made one final application to the system he had manipulated his entire life, requesting early parole on compassionate grounds. In the hearing room sat a woman named Darlene. The sister of the German tourist Trudeau had shot over a case of mistaken identity. She had come expecting to finally face a monster. What rolled in instead was a dying man who could barely speak. During the hearing, one of the parole commissioners asked Trudeau a direct question. What did he think about death? Trudeau's answer was 5 words. I think it is a punishment. It was as close to a reckoning as he would ever offer. The board granted the compassionate release, and within roughly 2 months, Yves Trudeau was dead at the age of 62. Even his ending was hidden. No public record marks the exact date he died or where he was buried. The man responsible for more confirmed kills than any criminal in Canadian history simply vanished, his grave unmarked, his history buried with him. There was no procession of 150 bikers this time, no headlines, no monument. Yves Trudeau killed 43 people in plain sight, and the police never came looking because every body was written off as gangsters cleaning up their own. He spent 15 years proving that the most dangerous man in the country is the one nobody is hunting. But what happens when the whole world is hunting a Hell's Angel, and he still cannot be touched? Click on the next video to see the hunt that took 2 decades to end.